In much of the West, and particularly in dry forests in the West, we're seeing an increase in fire and severity of fire. We're seeing larger, more kind of homogeneous patches of high severity fire where all the vegetation is killed. You tend to see fewer species coming back to these landscapes. We were particularly interested in how that's influencing birds and bats and other wildlife in these forests. Conversely, where we haven't seen fire in a really long time, we have kind of overly dense fire-suppressed forests, we also see a reduction in species. We were looking at bats, and they actually did fine in the burnt landscapes and even in the high severity areas. Where we saw fewer of them was in these places that haven't burned in a century. These are forests that are really adapted to low and moderate severity fire. And so when you see kind of departures from those historical patterns, you start to lose some of the species that are adapted to that disturbance. We have one study looking at the 2020 wildfires in the Southern Rockies here near Fort Collins. One just kind of up the slope, the 2020 Cameron Peak Fire. There's a couple other East Troublesome burned into Rocky Mountain National Park. So we're looking at large terrestrial mammals with camera traps. And similar questions like how are these wildlife coming back after the fire? Are they coming back after the fire? In Colorado, we have this really big elevational gradient. So at the lower ends, you have ponderosa pine, which probably burned a lot historically. Higher ends, you get in the subalpine forest, lodgepole. Those places didn't burn that often. They would burn every 100, every 200 years or so. And when they burned, they tend to burn pretty severely. And so the question is, are wildlife adapted to those historical patterns, or is there kind of a consistent response to fire? So if we're seeing more high severity in these historically frequent systems, that seems to be a bad thing. Would we see the same thing when we have high severity up in the lodgepole, say, where it was typical? So that's kind of an open question that we're trying to answer. We have connections with the folks that are doing the land management, every day out in the forest, and so we can have partnerships with those practitioners and address questions that they have about managing these forests. We also work closely with more kind of academic institutions at universities on more kind of basic science questions. And so we're able to kind of bridge those gaps and do really cool science that's really applicable and useful on the ground for the huge amount of land that the Forest Service manages across the United States.